have to describe with precision, clarity, and objectivity what it is you're looking at. And they're relying on you. So decide who's going to keep their eyes open and who's going to close them. All right. Ready? Okay. 45 seconds. All right, half this room, close your eyes. There is no falling asleep in Amy Herman's session, all right? 45 seconds, close your eyes. Describers, here's your picture. Go ahead. All right, stop. Open your eyes and take a look at what was being described to you. Did you get it right? You had a good idea? That we all right, that we had a table. We have a table in an otherwise empty room with 4 chairs turned upside down, and their legs are intertwining like tree branches. Easy for me to say because I've seen it so many times. So I'm pushing you into the deep end of the pool so you can get used to looking at works of art and talking about it. Now I want you to switch places. Describer becomes the listener. Ready? The other half of the room, shut your eyes. All right, ready? 45 seconds to describe the following image. Go ahead. All right, stop. Take a look. I know what you're thinking. The listeners were saying, what do you mean upside down groceries and a bucket and lipstick? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? So here's what we have to do. Here's what we have to do. First of all, I'm going to tell you something. I'm watching you while all of you are doing this. And describers, this is what you were doing. And it goes like this, and like this, and like this. Their eyes were closed. They couldn't see you. And you were drawing the picture for them. So this gives you an idea of how we think about looking at new data, and more importantly, how do we communicate things with clarity, precision, and objectivity when we've never seen them before. So now you're all good at this. For the next exercise, I don't want you to talk to your new friend. I want you to just do it yourself. I want everyone in the room to raise your right hand, please. Right hand up in the air. Don't talk to your partner about this one. You can only put your hand down, looking at the slide that I've put up on the screen, you can only put your hand down when you see something definitive and unequivocal that you could describe to somebody who wasn't looking at the slide. If you see something absolutely definitive in this slide, you can put your hand down. Now, if your hand is still up, I'm going to tell you there's a mammal in the slide. If you see a mammal definitively and unequivocally, you can put your hand down. Now, if your hand is still up, and there are a lot of you, have your hands up, I'm going to tell you that this is a mammal that has 4 legs. If you see a mammal that has 4 legs in this slide, you can put your hand down. Now, you're all looking weepy. Let me take my hand down. I'm so tired. You can all put your hands down. Now, don't discuss it. I want to show you an overexposed version of this photograph and show you what you were looking at. Oh, go back. Now, Raise your hand if you saw the cow in this picture, in this one. Okay, about 15 of you in this entire room saw the cow in this picture. Now, this is not a trick of the eye. This is not an optical illusion. This is a real photograph. It's called the Renshaw cow, and it was developed by a man named Dr. Samuel Renshaw in World War II to help Navy pilots discern enemy warfare. But that's not why I show it to you. I show it to you because about 5 years ago, I went to hear a man speak in New York, and his name was Apollo Robbins. Now, for those of you who don't know who Apollo Robbins is, he used to be a professional con man. And now he works on the right side of the law, and he works in the intelligence community, as do I. I'd heard about him and read about him, and I wanted to go hear him speak. So I grabbed my friend Robin, who works for the DA's office in Manhattan. I said, come on, Robin, let's go hear Apollo Robbins speak. Well, Apollo was standing at the door greeting everybody who came in. I didn't know what he looked like. I thought it was an usher. Shook my hand, shook everyone's hand. Hello, hello, grabbed my arm. Hello. I got to my seat. My 2 bracelets were gone. He took both my bracelets, and he took people's watches and their belts and their glasses and their wallets, and then he put all our stuff on a table in the front of the room for this collective embarrassment. So when I got my bracelets back, I decided to listen to what the guy had to say, and he started with this exercise. He asked us to do what I asked you to do. Raise your right hand and put it down when you see something definitive and unequivocal. And don't you know, my friend Robin put her hand down right away. And I'm squinting and I'm thinking, is that a platypus in the upper right-hand corner? Is that a kitten in the lower left-hand corner? Is there an owl up there? I didn't know what I was looking at. And the harder I squinted, the less I saw. And to make matters worse, Robin leans over and whispers, I can't believe you don't see this, she says. So I start to get nervous and sweat because this is what I do for a living. I help people look at works of art to enhance their observation skills, and I could have looked at this for 20 minutes and I would have never seen the cow. 15 of you in the room, approximately, saw the cow, the rest of you didn't. It says nothing about your perception, but what it says is a premise for this afternoon's session. No 2 people see anything the same way. As much as you want to believe that people see the world the way you do, they don't. Nobody's looking out of your lenses and seeing the world the way you do. So that is the premise for this afternoon, that no 2 people see anything the same way. I show you a painting now from 1593 by Giuseppe Arcimboldo. You don't have to worry about artists' names or years. What is it? It's a black bowl with onions, leeks, turnips, some greens, and some nuts. But the real power of this painting is revealed when you turn it upside down. It becomes the vegetable gardener. And it reminded me of what the late Dr. Wayne Dyer said. He said, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. I'm going to say that twice. Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. This is what I do in the art of perception. I travel around the world, and I literally and figuratively help people change the way they look at things. I go to crime scenes. I go to hospitals where they can't solve the medical mystery. I go to sites of terrorism attacks, and I help people. Sometimes I turn paintings upside down. Sometimes I ask questions they wouldn't have thought of to help them change the way they see things. The session is called The Art of Perception, Seeing What Matters. I'll get it out there. I am a recovering attorney. I'm an attorney in recovery, and I'm also an art historian. And I like to think that I took the practical aspects of each of those disciplines to create this program almost 17 years ago. I was the head of education at a small museum in New York City called the Frick Collection. And I started the program when I was the head of education there, and it was for medical students only. The idea was simple. Take medical students out of a clinical setting, bring them to an art museum, teach them to analyze works of art, so when they go back to the hospital, they'll be better observers of their patients. Not rocket science and not my idea. Yale started the program, and with their gracious permission, I started a version of it for medical students in New York City. And one night I was out to dinner telling my friends that these medical students that were coming to the museum, they didn't just have vision like this, they had vision like this. They knew nothing about the world. It was all about diagnosis and physiology. And my friend Richard said, why are you just doing this program for medical students? Why aren't you doing this for people who really need good observation skills? I said, like who? He said, like cops. Why aren't you doing this for homicide detectives? And I thought, I don't know. So that was Saturday night. Monday morning, I picked up the phone. I go big. I called the NYPD. And I want you to picture the guy at the switchboard, okay? Hi, my name is Amy Herman. I'm head of education at the Frick Collection, and I have a great idea. I train medical students to enhance their observation skills by learning to look at works of art, and I think it would be great for homicide detectives. There was dead silence on the other end of the phone, and I was transferred this many times until I got to a deputy commissioner, and I knew he got it because he said to me in his very deep voice, Miss Herman, if this is such a visual thing, why are we on the phone? 6 months later, every newly promoted captain in the NYPD had to take my course, learn to look at works of art, and then go back onto the streets and into the precincts. And fast forward to July 25th, 2005, it hit the front page of the Wall Street Journal, column A1, and it said, "To master the art of solving crime, cops study Vermeer at the Frick Collection." Every inbox in my life imploded. I got calls from all over the world, from the FBI and the CIA and every branch of the military and the Navy SEALs and Fortune 500 companies and shock and trauma nurses and librarians and teachers and guidance counselors, and they all said the same thing: come teach us how to see like you did with those cops in New York. Here's the bottom line: I can't teach anybody how to see. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm an old lawyer who happens to be an art historian. But what I can do, and what I'm going to do with you today, is my method called the 4 A's. Every new case, every new witness, every new litigant, every new judge, any new problem you have, you practice 4 A's every day, whether you realize it or not. First, you assess your situation. You say, what do I have in front of me? Then you analyze it. You say, what do I need? What can I get rid of? How do I prioritize my information? Then you articulate it. You talk to someone. You send them an email. You send them a text. You talk to yourself. You write a memo, and then you act. You make a decision. You assess, you analyze, you articulate, and you act multiple times every day. But I want to give you 2 caveats that also begin with A. The first one is accountability. You are accountable for every decision you make. And the second A is called the anchor bias. What is the anchor bias? It's the human tendency to believe the first thing we see or hear is true. So that's what I do. After the Wall Street Journal article came out, I quit my full-time job. And I travel around the world now using my 4 A's. It is now my honor and privilege to work with 13 divisions of the NYPD, my hometown police department. Every new surveillance agent in the FBI has to take this class. I train the new analysts at the CIA. I work with the even-numbered teams of the United States Special Operations Navy SEALs, Fortune 500 companies, global leaders, makeup, shock and trauma nurses, and now I've written this crazy book called Visual Intelligence, which we'll have out there when I'm done speaking. But I don't tell you all this to tell you why I'm on Delta Airlines all the time. I tell you this because I have a really unique lens across the professional spectrum. And after training thousands of people, this is what I've noticed. If you're in my session, yourselves included, you already have probably extraordinary observation and perception skills. That's not the problem. The problem, as I perceive it, is in the consistent breakdown of the effective communication of what it is we observe. Something gets lost from here to here to here and to here, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what's getting lost. Just listen to the news one day. You're going to see things are getting lost. There's a huge gap, and I'm trying to fill that gap with art. Crazy as it sounds, it seems to be working.
One other. Tell me about an experience that made a difference. Yeah.
One of our conferences last year, Judge Gorky, who just talked.
At a conference, okay.
Sorry.
Hang on just a second.
So at our conference last year, was it Macomb or was it Judge Flurkey had a session about domestic violence, and it was interactive, and you were put in the role of the person being abused. And I think we all felt it was very impactful to be in that position. I mean, and so we're thinking about doing it for our staff at like development days.
So it wasn't just knowledge that you were picking up on in that education. You were actually having an experience that maybe increased your empathy for
Exactly.
folks
Yep.
that you might interact with and not realize.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think what we want to establish right away is, why do we do education? It's an investment of our time, our resources, both real. You know, you all had to, there was pay to get here, even in your states, locally, time away, faculty get paid. I mean, it can be an investment. It is an investment in many ways. So we wanted to really talk about the why. And I'm going to just go through a couple things. I'll back up. On page, I forgot to number these, in your book, in the handouts, and we'll walk through this if you don't have it in front of you. Do we know what page it is? Yeah. So in our materials, this is the first resource that we have. And I'm not going to have us go through the whole document. I'm going to pull out pieces just to get you thinking about the answer to this question. But if you were to take it back to your local court, your community, you could drill into this even more in really justifying, explaining, discussing why we do this. So each of you, just a couple of you gave us some examples. but how does education make a difference? Is there anything that wasn't said in just reflecting upon your experience or the experiences you heard or you thought of that wasn't captured? Is there anything, reasons why you send your staff to get education? We talked about maybe there's some attitudes, some things we need to think about, be more aware of other folks and some diversity issues, knowledge that we get. Why do we send people to education? Yes?
Well, sometimes when I send someone to education, it's not just for themselves, it's so they can bring it back and share it so they become an educator as well as being educated.
Okay, so I'm just going to summarize. Basically, it's for the person. So there is enrichment that goes on for the person, but also it's to bring it back to the court and share that experience, bring it back, that maybe there's some improvement that you're exploring, that you want somebody to go, learn about, bring back, explore. Others? Yeah, please. We've got to get roller skates for Margaret. Sorry, Margaret.
A lot of times, a lot of my staff deals with customer service issues, and then they go to trainings where they learn to, they get some tools to help them deal with their situations that they face when they're dealing with defendants at the counter.
Great. Yes, so there are absolutely tools, and I'm going to kind of piggyback right on that right away. I mean, education, when we all have our mission, right? We have visions, strategic plans, our missions. Education is a primary tool to achieve those. Customer service is one we can all relate to. So we talk about who benefits, and I'm going to highlight some of the things you said and add to that. You basically already talked about it. The individual gets that personal enrichment, professional preparation, advancement. They need to learn how to do their job. You have people in a new role, new environment in the courts. Courts are very different than others. You also have the court needing well-trained and educated workforce so that we can provide the service to the public. You talk about common practices you learn about a lot, and people don't learn this unless they have been educated on it. It's not always go to a seminar. You can have the informal one-on-one education opportunities. There's also risk management that we do, the court benefits from, because you assume that if somebody gets educated, their errors are going to drop, potentially. The costs are going to go down if people are not having delays because they know how to do their job. There's all kinds of risk management purposes that we provide education for. Costs and delays go down. Let me throw out 3 more quickly to you. There's the public. We talk a lot about public trust and confidence, do we not? We ought to have a song that talks about public trust and confidence. It's in all of our curriculum, all of the core that you look at. And it is basically trying to ensure, in our rule in Ohio that mandates education for judges, it says the first few words are to serve the public interests that requires the competent performance of the court. So, and I think Arizona is something very similar in your rule. So we provide the education for purposes of public trust and confidence, and increasing that we want to be sure when people come to the court, it's where they get justice done, and education plays a role. They want efficiency, effectiveness, and they want to have consistency, because people see consistency as equaling fairness and equality. Justice partners, police, the other branches of government, the legislative, the executive, their interests, they're competing for our funds sometimes, right? So we need to be sure that the court is responsible with those. And also, we are in a reflection upon each other. So when our folks are well educated and get good public service, other branches of government are reflected upon as well positively. So when we talk about why then do we do education, why do we ask ourselves, wearing the hat as supervisor, wearing the hat of managers, going back to your courts, one of the huge reasons why we do what we do is what I put before you. There's knowledge, there's skills, there's attitudes we need to learn that impact what we do every day and the service we provide. I have something here. Why is administrative oversight of education in the court important? Well, frankly, what we're talking about here is back to what I was saying. There's an investment, indirect and direct costs. And I like to talk about the whole purpose of doing education is to make change, changing behavior, some kind of change you're expecting. And so you're trying to figure out, you want the results that you want, and you want to be sure as a manager you're overseeing. I talk about the right stuff. You need to get the right people the education. Maybe some poor performers, maybe some folks that need to be challenged or have improvements. You try and get them the right education, and that's what we're going to focus on today, about what makes for some of the right education. And then finally, the right environment, and this is a challenge we'll talk about through the day, or through this hour, that as managers, we need to be sure when people get education, they come back to the office on Monday morning, that there's an environment that supports that. If someone's gone and there's a change that they're wanting to bring back, or an idea they want to try on, what happens? The learning gets lost if when they come back to the office and to the court, there's not support or will from the manager, from the organization that sent them. So right people, right education, and then right environment supports the opportunity for this education to make a difference. So, anything anybody wants to add to that, colleagues? All right, well, the next focus that we're going to move to here in demonstrating the use of this curriculum, as my two colleagues here described to you, the materials in here are really amazing. It's very exciting to have this as a core competency, and there's some excellent content. One of the documents that we excerpt is from the competency itself, or I'm sorry, the core itself. And I'm not going to read it to you, but this first description that talks about the relevance will reinforce what we just discussed. And I want to just reiterate, too, that it is broader, and the competency talks about this, it's broader than just being able to education so people do their job. You got this big box, okay? Within it, there's a big circle of education. There's knowledge you need, and there's even attitudes that we talked about. Within education is skills, things that people need to be able to do to be competent at their jobs. But the big box within is development. We need stretch opportunities. We need to give our folks stretch opportunities, mentor opportunities, think about succession planning, give them opportunities to teach. All this is development, and it's not just a formal setting of education. So Jeff, you want to pick up from there and talk a little bit about what's in the competency further? I keep saying competency. I got to say core, but it's the same, right?
The core. Let's dive into the core. Could I have the clicker too? Thank you. So how many of you are sold on the importance of judicial education? Can the camera get this? Everyone's hands went up. So in some respect, we're kind of preaching to the choir, or maybe in the last 20 minutes, we've made converts out of you to where now you're sold on the need for judicial education. Let's talk about where the rubber hits the road. As Christy talked about, as managers and supervisors, we have some specific responsibilities for using education. And I tend to kind of throw these under the umbrella of a phrase that a very wise leader once shared with me. And that was, never mistake activity for accomplishment. Never mistake activity for accomplishment. The idea is, it's never good enough just to show up. Like we don't just expect our clerks to show up to the front counter. We expect more of them. Proactive engagement with the public and processing data correctly. There's all these expectations we have that translate activity into accomplishment. It's the same way in the education classroom. We are responsible as managers and supervisors for creating education sessions that translate the activity, being in the classroom, receiving the education, into accomplishment. The accomplishment is achieving learning objectives and that change that Christy was talking about when that person comes out of education and goes into the court and is able to implement what they've just learned. And so some things that we need to be aware of as court supervisors to include in our judicial education is that it's continuous and creative. We need to engage the people who are coming into our classes, and we also need to provide a sufficient amount of education. Education is not an inoculation. Boy, if it was that easy, it'd be great, right? You get a shot, you know, and you don't get the disease ever again in your life. Education is not that way. It's not a one-time inoculation. It's a continuous effort to refresh and revive and remind and innovate and change. Education is inclusive as well. How many of you have a multi-generational workforce? You might have heard from Ray Billett and Dana Quinn, although I think maybe we're competing with their session right now, about multiple generations in the workplace. We've been talking about this, and it's becoming more and more apparent that we need to build our educational programs to be inclusive, not just for generations, but for all the differences that we have in our court staff. Accessible and tailored, we need to make sure that it's specific to the jobs that folks are doing and that they can access the training, whether that means traveling to Phoenix to attend training or whether it means pulling up their computer screen and being able to log in and effectively take a class using a learning management system. We'll talk a little bit more about education being evaluated, but you need to begin with the end in mind and then evaluate whether you were able to accomplish that end. So again, these management practices, just like you would compile court tools statistics, you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of the training that you've delivered. Education and training benefits from that buy-in and participation from the leadership at the top. And so I think it makes a very strong statement when we have our leaders engaged as faculty, or at the very least, really supportive, visibly supportive of training and education. The education must be built to span the career. Are there any folks who maybe have experienced in their jurisdictions or heard of opportunities that come up again and again each year? It's the same opportunity, and you kind of get the same people going to that same opportunity. So over the course of a career, they would get that same class on X topic maybe 6 times. It's good in the sense that continuing education is provided, but let's think about education as the long game. This is spanning a career, and education actually is promising in helping us to retain those employees, to retain those millennials, to retain our staff when they have a strong dose of training and education and a career path that includes training and education that they can look forward to, and that leads to progression. So some very strong payback or payoff that we can receive as managers and supervisors for putting together very purposeful and well-designed training and education. I will now hand it back over to Christy, and we're going to engage in some activities ourselves. Okay.
All right. So the next activity, I think Jeff just mentioned, I'm going to ask him to stand up with me and weigh in at any point too, but we want to hear from you, and then we'll kind of give you some more information about each of these. So how do we ensure it's quality education, not just any education? As he said, we all, at this point, we're here at this conference, we believe in education, but we want to make sure it's making that difference that we talked about, all right? So there are some adult principles, and how many are familiar with adult learning principles? Have done some of this before? Okay, we got a fair amount in the room, very good. So there are some key things that we know how adults learn, and sometimes it's the same as children, sometimes, a lot of times, it's not, and so we'll piece that apart. And to go into, and let me also say that one of the most important, or I'll ask you, what do you think is one of the most important factors for a successful education? Without looking up on the screen, that doesn't answer it for you, by the way, but what's the most important factor? What is that? Relevance? It's a great idea. Yeah, making sure it's relevant. Different learning styles in the room. Okay, you all need to be teaching this right now, so we're going to draw out more of this. What else? What are important factors for making education successful? Engagement, interacting, keeping folks engaged. And it doesn't have to be with us. It can be with a piece of paper writing notes. It can be looking at something, talking to somebody next to you. Other factors. Competent faculty. Malcolm Null, who is the father of what we call andragogy, it's not pedagogy, it's how adults learn, said that. I actually have his quote right here. The behavior of the teacher probably influences the character of the learning climate more than any single factor. No pressure, Jeff and me. So, it's absolutely important, as I said. I actually say to folks that teach for us, because sometimes the best person to teach a judge or the best person to teach a court administrator is another court administrator or judge. They know that. So I tell them, you're not expected to be the expert. You are expected to go ahead of your colleagues to think about this and draw out from folks in the room what the expertise is and what we can do to learn from each other. Any other factors that make for successful learning? Yeah.
You know, I've got one that's my favorite, and I'll submit it to you for your reaction, and that is allowing participants to learn from one another. Because I would make the case that some of the strongest and most competent, some of the strongest teachers and most competent people are the people that are coming to your judicial education classes. In some cases, I know when I'm teaching, there are people who know more about the topic than I do. And so I say unlock that power and design your classes so that participants can learn and teach from one another too. That's a really powerful aspect of the adult learning classroom.
Absolutely. Anything else come to mind? Well, we're going to dive into it. We're going to go through some of these, some you just mentioned. And if you, I'm very interested because Ohio is not completely paperless at our education yet, so I was really interested to see how this works at your conference. Some of you have laptops and devices, and some of you don't. So I'm going to read aloud, and I have 8 factors. And as we go through these factors, I'll read them. I want you to raise your hand, kind of vote as we go, about if you think that one is so important. In fact, I see it not done well a lot, okay? It's so important, it's not done well. I want you to raise your hand as we go. You can have more than one vote. It's okay with me. All right. So the first one is adult learn, and this is learning about how adults learn in an education setting. So adults are independent and self-sufficient, and they are professionals that we need to keep in mind. So this is some of what Jeff was saying, and you all have been saying, is that you brought questions today. There's a reason you're here. You're self-sufficiently teaching yourself. Basically, you have things you want to learn. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and so you've come to a room. But basically, we learn from equals, like I said. We don't need experts in the room, as Jeff was just describing. We learn from each other. We're self-sufficient. We know how to get the education. Jeff, you want to add anything to that particular bullet?
Nicely said.
Okay. All right, the next one is, I forgot to vote. Okay, does anybody think that when you've seen people teach, they don't acknowledge the fact that you've got self-sufficient learners in here? You want to raise your hand if you think that's pretty common in the education I've had as an adult. Okay, got a couple folks. Okay. All right, the next one, and I'm sorry, listening audience, I can't see your hand raised, but we know you're out there. The next one is adults need immediate application. It's a variation of what I just described, where you've come with questions, but you're going to go back, and unlike children, we have problems to solve back there. You know, we're all trying to avoid looking at our devices right now because, you know, we don't want to get distracted with those issues, challenges, etc. But we've come with immediately needing to have this information applied. So that is huge. And so a classroom, any education experience should be answering, providing solutions, helping us, giving us tools that we can go back and use. Show of hands, is that something you've struggled with and not getting from courses before? Okay, at least one or two, three. Okay. Hop in when you want to, but I'm going to just keep rapid firing through these.
Sure. I would just make another mention of activity and accomplishment there. You know, going through a class that is just not relevant, that doesn't apply, is oftentimes a waste of time, you know,
Yeah.
and because it doesn't lead to that accomplishment and the application of what's been learned directly into the job. So.
And I would say, you know, when we're looking at money, we can't just treat education as this pleasurable, you know, departure from the workplace. It's nice, you know, that we were learning about mindfulness. We need to step back and refuel and all the rest of it. But there has to, but that education has a purpose to it as well when we're offsite. Okay, the next one is that our adult learners have experiences and they want to, and they have a variety of experiences, so that we learn best in community, okay? We've said it. There's something called community of practice. That's what our associations try to nurture. It so that you don't always have to sit in a classroom to learn. You're learning from the emails that fly by, the newsletters or the notices and all the rest of it. But any education, formal, informal, is best when we are doing it in community. And we can sometimes simulate that, but honestly, face-to-face, especially for smaller counties and such, and judges, our judges that might get isolated, they need a community of practice that they can learn from each other. So, anybody see that as a particularly, we don't always have time when we go to education to build that community? There's not time to build in. Yeah. I mean, you guys have the networking breaks and it's in all the rest of it, but yeah, it is important to learn from people in the room. Okay, the next one is adults need to be respected. Now that's, I think children do too. There's not a difference, but it is different how that plays out. Tell me, have you ever been in a class where you felt like, I was not respected, and what did that look like, or what happened, or can anybody recall an experience like that? Or they saw something in an education experience? Yeah.
I've seen it before where the speaker will dismiss the person's question. I was just going to say, I've seen it before where the speaker will dismiss the person's question or kind of blow it off, and everybody kind of feels it in the room, and sometimes they say, I'll get back to it later, and they do or don't. But at the time when it's not addressed, there's just this feeling of, okay, nobody wants to speak after that.
Right. It has a chilling effect. It goes back to what I was saying, or Malcolm Knoll was saying, that the teacher has a huge impact on that climate of learning. If you're all taking your cue, even how we treat each other, you know, we'll cue you as to, is there respect in this room? Is it safe? We talk about a safe learning environment. It goes back to the community. We need to be sure that when we're not embarrassed and we're able to speak freely and our ideas and thoughts are respected. Anything to add?
The classroom is the perfect place to make a mistake, you know. And in fact, some of the best learning happens when participants are challenged and when they feel safe enough to give a wrong answer or make a mistake. You want that to happen in the classroom, so it can be a learning opportunity and where it can be corrected and applied when folks get back into the office.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we haven't talked, there's lots of learning theories you can talk about, but basically you want to give people that opportunity to take in the information and use it. And it has to be done safely. So, and people, somebody already said, people, and that's one of these bullets, but we learn in a variety of different ways. So we have to be sure, I mean, we have a short hour, but within that we need to be sure you have something visual, you're hearing something, you're able to maybe apply something, hear from others. You know, there's all kinds of ways that we're need to think about that when we're teaching and learning. We need to know that we have our needs to be met there too in the learning environment. The other is we like to know what to expect. Agendas. We don't want to be embarrassed. We like to see what's coming. that kind of is in meetings and everything else, but in education setting too. That's why we have learning objectives, where we're trying to say, okay, here's where we're going, here's the signpost. And as faculty, we've got to kind of go back to that. Okay, here's where we've been, and now we're going to go forward. So up to this point, we've talked why do education? Basically, what is education? What is quality education? And what is our role throughout that in ensuring that it is quality? All right, so the next one is negative. Oh, I haven't been checking in. Any votes on that? Do you feel like sometimes you go to education, you have an idea where it's going? Have you had that experience before where you plunk in a room, you don't know where the faculty person's going, you don't have any materials maybe to clue you in? Anybody had one of those experiences before? Not at this conference, of course. But all right, well, good. I'm not seeing hands go up, so maybe that's not as difficult or a principle violated so much. All right, the next one is one I don't think about, but I just went to I'm not going to tell you what year was my high school reunion, but I just went this past weekend. And adults have had negative educational experiences, and so then when they come into a learning session, they already have maybe a fear factor, an attitude, that kind of thing. A lot of those colleagues of mine didn't come to the reunion because they were disengaged in high school, and they've continued to feel disengaged later on. But that is something that is really not to be underestimated, that not everybody likes education. And that when we come in here, we hope that it is not just your standard classroom, but you're really looking at how are you learning and having folks learn from each other and engage. Anything to add, Jeff?
Nope, nicely
Okay.
said.
All right. The last two, one is, already been said, I think you said active engagement. We need the opportunity to practice. We need a variety. We need to, do you know how long I can keep your attention up here? Don't look it up on Google out there, but last I knew, we can hold your attention for 20 minutes, okay? A slide can hold your attention for 9 seconds. The point, though, and that 20 minutes keeps going down, 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 right? Because our attention span. The point isn't that I just have to keep changing on you, right? Have some lecture, have some activity, have some talking. So, all right, have people seen learning that has not been engaging and not done well? All right, that's got the most hands up, actually, interestingly. Okay, yeah, that tells you. All right, the last one we talked about a little bit already, and that's looking at a variety of ways people learn. Do you want to speak to that at all, beyond what we've said so far as
I'd like to demonstrate it.
Do it.
Okay. You mind if I take away the next activity then?
Please, please.
So, I think we've made the case that education solves everything. Is that correct? I mean, you believe us? Show of hands. Education solves everything. Okay, not so much. Well, what's wrong? It's this powerful tool that we've been talking about and hyping up. And I just took a poll earlier in the class, and you all said that you were on board with judicial education. Is there any challenge that judicial education can't solve? Well, the answer to that is yes. We all know when we saw the old core put up on the screen here, we saw that education was only one facet of 12 other facets that make up our core. And so there's a lot more that court managers and supervisors must do in addition to education to get the job done. Education sure helps, but it is not the only approach, and in some cases, it's not even the right approach to management challenges. So I have come prepared with some scenarios. There's a total of 6 scenarios that you can reference in the materials in the core curriculum design for education, training, and development. So I took these right out of that resource, and I'm going to share them with you. And my challenge to you is this an educational issue that can be solved through education, or is there another approach that might be more effective? Let's start with Raphael. Raphael, in addition to being one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, is one of 7 counter clerks in your mid-sized court. Although he has handled his responsibilities effectively in the past, recently he has demonstrated impatience with several minority court users who have had difficulty understanding how to respond to questions on a certain set of court forms. Is this an educational issue? Okay, could we have a microphone for some feedback here? Who's got something to say about this, whether it's an educational issue or not?
Yes.
Go for it, yes.
It might not be educational because in the past he's been able to handle it. He may have something personal going on in his life that's causing him to be short-tempered.
Very astute observation. A great performer Raphael was, but then something changed. And we don't quite know what that is, so we haven't fully diagnosed this. And it's hard to diagnose something from just a 2-sentence hypothetical. Other thoughts on whether this is an educational, yes?
I think I agree with what you said, but I think he also could use some training on interpersonal skills and dealing with customer service aspects. And sometimes it's just a reminder of he's slacking in certain areas, so it's just a reminder on the customer service aspect.
Yeah, remember what I said, education has to span the entire career. It's not just an inoculation. Raphael might have gone to customer service training 4 years ago, but maybe hasn't had a refresher on that and could benefit from it. Excellent point. Any other comments on this scenario? Okay. Well, let's go to another scenario. There's no right answer to these. And again, it's because we only have limited information in the 2 sentences of the scenario. But you can see how there might be many different approaches. Maybe one approach would be just to talk with Raphael about what's going on. And then you might be able to make that point just through a standard kind of management coaching opportunity. So let's move on to 3 court employees who all staff the self-help center. You have a large urban court, and all of these 3 people are on duty at the same time except for lunch hours when they rotate, and they each take a shift at lunch. Recently, the court initiated online access to court forms, which has generated an increase in phone calls to the center as the public learns how to use these online forms. The employees trying to assist court users on the phone are not assisting those who are present and in person in the center. They're not assisting them in a timely manner, so there's long lines and there's a backup in the lobby. Is this an educational issue? What do you think? Calls coming in, crowds forming, and 3 staff. Yes, Ron, we've got a microphone too.
It sounds more like a staffing issue than a education or training. I mean, how to I shouldn't use this word after plenary this morning, but multitask, how to get the employees to work faster or be able to handle more than one customer at a time. Maybe that part might be helped by education, but it sounds like they built it and they came.
Yes, we have these unintended consequences of well-meant changes in our court all the time that we have to respond to, and I would submit that it's probably not a reasonable expectation of a court staff to handle counter service while speaking on the phone to someone else. You just can't be in 2 places at once. So this one is just illustrating, and Ron, you hit it right on the head there. That there are staffing issues, there are resource issues, there are all kinds of other issues that can sometimes more effectively and more immediately alter a situation, improve a situation, and education is not always the appropriate way to tackle that. I'll kind of end with this scenario from my own experience. From time to time, we get requests and invitations to lead a team building session. And so I have a staff of over 20 people, and many of them are great instructors and great teachers. And we love going out, we're at the AOC in Phoenix, and we love going out to other courts across the state and helping them through teaching and education. And so one of these requests that commonly comes in is for team building. And this is the request that we probably ask the most questions about before we go out and do it. Because we know that there could be a lot of issues that are kind of below the surface that are leading to ineffective teams, and that education might not only not solve those issues, but might exacerbate some of those issues. So it's one of the cautionary tales that I share from my own experience, that a lot of times there's other management work and other management techniques that can take place before education can really have the effect that you want education to have. So with that, I'll pass it back over to my colleague, Christy.
Thanks, Jeff. And one of the things he and I were talking about, you have a presenter that's going to be here tomorrow, Greg, who's going to talk about presentation skills, but he does a public customer service course, and he has this great handout that talks about, you have to ask him about it, how to just ascertain, is education the answer, isn't it? And one of the things I've seen is, does the person, do they don't know something? Well, education can help that. It could also be they can't do something, then maybe they need some skill training, but there's more involved too. It can't happen, meaning there are resources and something in the environment that's not allowing it. Maybe they don't have the equipment, and then they won't do it. We know that's not, that is an administrative responsibility of supervisors. But definitely we're looking at not just pushing somebody out the door saying, we have an issue here with this person, let's send them to education. It's not always the answer. So we are going to highlight a couple of resources in your materials of the core. And it is basically asking the question, we talked about having resources that we spend and invest in people to send them to education. How do we know that learning has gone on? I'll ask that question of you. How do you know when your folks go out to courses that they learn something, that it's going to benefit when they come back? How about right here for?
We actually started a new thing when staff go to conferences. We put it on our next monthly staff agenda that they have to present something to the group of what they best took from the conference. So it's been going really well. We have people bringing in handouts, like they really paid attention in their classes.
That's great.
And so it's their expectation. Every single one of them has to come, regardless of their role. They have to bring something back and present it.
That's great. So it enhances their learning. They need to be engaged when they're there.
Yeah.
And then it's sharing
Yeah.
and spreading, dividing. Do you want to add anything to that?
We learned in the past, I was just going to say, because we learned in the past that people would come back and they'd share handouts with only their division or something, and then it wasn't a learning opportunity for the whole office.
Yeah.
So it's really improved things already. We've been doing it just for 3 months now.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Little in-services. Did you want to add something to that? Yeah.
So I try to take it a step further, and it's not just what did you learn, how do you anticipate applying it in this area? What do you want to do to make it a part of your routine at work?
That's great. I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit. There are 4 levels that we look at as educators of evaluation. How do we evaluate that the learning has actually occurred? Education has made a difference, so to speak. The first level is one we're really familiar with. After this session, after every session, you're asked today to fill out an evaluation. That's a kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, here's what I think right now. But that's not going to tell us, does that make a difference for you necessarily? We can ask questions like, what, if anything, did you learn today that you didn't know before? Those are great questions. It's self-report. People are going to tell you, that's a good question, but it's not enough to find out if it makes a difference. The next level is what's called evaluate the learning. That happens right now, where Jeff and I have been trying to look across the room and find out where do we go, how much time do we spend on this. We can self-correct and help make sure, at least from the feedback we get here informally, that you're learning something, or we can speculate they're learning something. It's this next level that we need to figure out. When people go back to the office, how do we evaluate changed behavior? It's called also transfer of learning. You're talking to somebody that was a program evaluator for the legislature for 4 years. But anyhow, this is what we're going to focus on. The last one, and I'll come back to it in a minute and just show you some resources you can have. The last one is this results. How do you evaluate that it made a difference to the court? In Ohio, we had Ohio State University do a study several years ago, 2011, didn't find the results online, and thankfully they found out that it did make a difference for juvenile judges that took continuing education. But there is a form that I really want to commit your attention to here to read. It is called up at the front, and it's in our materials, it's in the core, and it's called Sample Form for Supervisor Evaluation of Transfer of Learning for Court Personnel. This is a simple form that is a one-on-one. I love the group issue of when you're in staff meetings. This is where, and I just have started doing it, where folks want to go to a conference, want to go to a seminar. I just say, send me a quick note about why. You know, what do you hope to get from it? What is the change? It'll say in here, is there knowledge, skills, attitude, anything that you want to change, right? So just get them to identify this, do it with them. They go to the course, and you meet and talk about it. They go to the course, and when they come back, just meet with them. It's a casual conversation. What did you learn? Here's what you thought you were going to get. Did you get from that? Is that something you're going to use? It goes back to what I was saying. If people go out and they never get asked and the environment doesn't support that learning that's gone on, it gets lost. So this is one really, I think, good resource for you in the materials. The last one in here is, it's called the Individualized Education Plan. As Jeff said, we all have a plan that we need to set for ourselves with our supervisors throughout our career. This is one way of just kind of tracking that. It identifies, you know, the topic, the event, what you wanted to learn, what the outcome was, and that you discuss this with your staff. So it's kind of a nice little tool that they can have and that you can use as well as the supervisors, those that you're supervisors. So this wasn't a big teaching here. I just wanted, Jeff and I wanted to show you those resources and really emphasize back to what we were saying is you got to know what the purpose of education is, get them in the right education, the right environment, and then evaluate that. So in closing, we want to just kind of bring home to you back to where we started and about why it matters and what we were hopefully all believing in at this point. How many people recognize this image? Okay. What did you think when you saw this the first time? Does anybody remember when it was in the news? Somebody shaking their head thinking, miracle. Well, it was called Miracle on the Hudson, right? How did he land that plane? How did that happen? And the answer warms an educator's heart. For 42 years, Captain Sully said, I've been making small, regular deposits in this bank of experience, education, and training, and on January 15th, the balance was sufficient so that I could make a very large withdrawal. We're all putting into our bank of education and experience, and we make withdrawals on that daily and sometimes really infrequently. But it is worth the investment because we are the court to the public every day. Our public expects that competent performance, and we are invested in the learning and education that helps us all. So with that, on behalf of my colleagues here, we want to thank you. We'll hang around a little bit to answer questions. Is there any final thing you'd like to say?
Go forth and educate.
Anything from you?
No, thanks everyone for coming. If anybody has any questions in regard to the core, you can just email me at kathy@nacomnet.org. So thanks again.